Today we're going to figure out how to make division stories. Let's warm up a bit with some division. 8/9 divided by 2/9. One strategy we've been using is to draw things out and visualize them. Here's a tape diagram showing 9/9. The division problem, though, is asking for 8/9 divided by 2/9. So what I'm going to do is isolate one of my ninths, so I'm left with 8 instead of 9/9. And here's my 8/9. Now the question is, how many 2/9 are there inside of 8/9? This makes it nice for us because we can start packaging 2/9. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then we count how many groups of 2/9 there are. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 groups of 2/9 inside of 8/9. 8/9 divided by 2/9 is equal to 4. Molly has a friend Xavier who has a bunch of strawberries. In fact, he has 11/8 cups of strawberries. He needs 3/4 of a cup of strawberries to make a batch of tarts. The question is, with 11/8 cups of strawberries, how many batches can he make? Again, I'm going to use my favorite strategy, which is to draw things out. So I'm going to illustrate here the dividend, the number that we are going to divide into groups, which is 11/8. Now we were asked to put 11/8 into groups of 3/4, right? 3/4 of a cup of strawberries makes a batch of tarts. How many batches are there? Oh, we need to find out how many groups of 3/4 we can take from 11/8. The problem is, I can't take fourths from eighths. Looking at it like this, I need to convert my fourths into eighths because I can take groups of eighths away much easier than I can fourths. So, 3/4. How do I make that into eighths? Simply going from 4 to 8 is a double move, right? We need to double 4 to get to 8. So if we're doubling the denominator, we also need to double the numerator. So 3/4 is equivalent to 6/8. This is much easier. My question becomes, how many groups of 6/8 can I take from 11/8? And here is one batch of 3/4, or 6/8 as we've come to learn. Do we have enough for another batch? No, we don't. We only have 5/8. Remember, the problem is asking us basically how many tarts we can make. We can make one tart, one whole tart with 3/4 a cup, which we know is 6/8. So there's one right there. We cannot make another whole tart. We do not have another whole batch, but we have part of a batch. How many pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 pieces. How many pieces make a batch? 6. Remember, we need 6/8 to make a batch. So we have enough to make one batch and 5/6 of another batch. And so 11/8 divided by 3/4, which we've learned is equivalent to 6/8, is equal to 1 whole and 5/6. Remember how we've been talking about the 2 different ways to interpret division problems, measurement or partitive? Let's dig a little deeper. Let's start with measurement division. If I were to interpret this division problem, 1/2 divided by 1/8, as measurement division, then I would use the phrase, how many 1/8 are there in 1/2? Let's draw this out. Okay, I'm going to start with 1 whole and cut it in half to show my dividend, 1/2, the number that we're actually going to chop up. My problem is asking how many eighths are in 1/2, so I'm going to start by cutting 1/2 in half, which gives me fourths. Now if I take those fourths and I cut them in half, notice my whole. How many pieces make a whole? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are eighths. So the question is, how many eighths are in 1/2? 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, interpreting 1/2 divided by 1/8 to say how many eighths are in 1/2, we've seen visually that the answer is 4. Now, there's the other way to interpret division problems, which is called partitive. Take a look at this problem. What if we used measurement division for this? We would read it as, how many 2/3 are there in 50? Now we could do that, but to me, that would be a lot of drawing. So what if instead we tried partitive division, the one that says 50 is 2/3 group of what size? What would that look like? Okay, if I know that 50 is 2/3, then I can start by drawing 3/3, right? That's a whole. And if I section off 2 of them, then I am now showing 2/3. And our question, interpreted as partitive, is 50 is 2/3. Okay, that's simple. So these 2/3 are 50. 50 is 2/3. Okay, easy so far. Something interesting has happened though. We can now figure out how much each of these thirds is actually worth. What is the value of each of these thirds? Has to be 25. If 2/3 is equal to 50, then each of those thirds will be 25. Hey, this helps us because if we know what each third is worth, then what is the value of that last third? 25 as well. Now this helps us again because remember our question. 50 is 2/3 group of what size? What is the size of the group altogether? Here it is. Simple math, multiplication, we have a total of 75. And so, 50 is 2/3 group of 75. And this makes sense. If we have 75 things and we take 2/3 of that, that will be equal to 50. Now we're going to use what we've been talking about with measurement and partitive division to write some division stories ourselves. The first step we will do is to decide on which interpretation we want to use, measurement or partitive. Then we'll draw a model, find the answer, choose a unit so they're not just floating numbers with no meaning, and then set up our situation. Let's go through a couple together. So the division problem, 1/2 divided by 1/8. We first need to decide if we want to use measurement or partitive to interpret this problem. If we used measurement, we would be saying how many 1/8 are there in 1/2. Do we want to do that? Or would it be easier to use partitive, in which case we would say 1/2 is 1/8 of what size? I don't know about you, but the measurement way of interpreting this problem seems much more understandable. So, I'm going to stick with how many eighths are in 1/2. Okay then, our next step is to draw a model. Now that we've decided we're going to use measurement division to interpret this division problem, let's draw it out. So here is my 1/2 being divided by 1/8, in which case we are saying, remember, measurement division, how many eighths are in 1/2? I draw 1/2, I figure out where my eighths are, and now I can count them. Which is our next step anyways, finding the solution. So, how many 1/8 are in 1/2? Going back to our drawing, we have 1/8, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 groups of 1/8, so our answer is 4. Now is the fun step. We need to bring some life to this problem. What kinds of things are we going to deal with? What units should we use? Another way we could look at this is we're dealing with 1/2 divided by 1/8 what's? We could use pounds, pounds of dirt, pounds of meat. We could use miles. In fact, let's just stick with miles. 1/2 a mile divided by 1/8 a mile. Now, does that sound like a story to you? No, we have one more step. And now we need to fill in this problem with units with some kind of story. So, in our case, we're dealing with miles. I've just decided to go with Julie wants to run 1/2 of a mile. She runs a route that's 1/8 of a mile long. How many times will she need to run that 1/8 of a mile to complete her 1/2 mile run? So you see what I did? I took our 1/2 divided by 1/8, knew that we were using miles, and I thought, okay, the question is, how many 1/8 are in 1/2? I could have somebody running 1/8, and we have to figure out how many times they would have to run that 1/8 to make 1/2. There it is. We could have come up with something else as well. What if we used ounces instead as our unit? We could have said something like this. Well, Tina uses 1/8 of an ounce of cinnamon each time she makes a batch of coffee cake. How many batches can she make if she only has 1/2 an ounce left in her spice jar? See, once again we have that 1/2 an ounce, and we're asking how many times can we take out 1/8 before it's all gone. Let's try another problem. 3/4 divided by 1/2. Remember step 1? We need to decide on a way to interpret this division problem. Are we going to use measurement or partitive? And the best way to figure this out is to say out loud the interpretation for both. So let's start with measurement. If we have 3/4 divided by 1/2, measurement division would have us say, how many 1/2s are in 3/4? That doesn't sound that bad. What about the partitive interpretation? According to that, we would say 3/4 is 1/2 a group of what size? Now, to be honest, either way that we interpret it sounds kind of easy to me, whether we are taking 1/2s out of 3/4 or we are saying 3/4 is a half a group of what size. But for some reason in my mind, I can visualize the partitive method for this problem a little easier. Here's what I mean. Step 2 is drawing the model, so I can put my visualization on paper. If the question is asking, 3/4 is half a group of what size, then I need to find out what the total of the group is going to be, knowing that half of it is equal to 3/4. Well, that's actually very easy. And so step 3 is a piece of cake. What's the answer? If we know that 3/4 is half of something, then all we need is 2 3/4 to make the whole. And that tells us what that something is that 3/4 is half of. What's 3/4 and 3/4? 6/4. Hey, partitive method was very easy this go around. But we're not done. Remember, we're writing a division story. We need to choose a unit. 3/4 divided by 1/2 of what? In this case, I'm going to stick with ounces of juice. But now I need to come up with a situation, a story to wrap this problem around. Here's what I came up with. 1 3/4 ounce can of orange juice. Can you visualize that? One can, that's 3/4 ounces of orange juice, is half of the ounces that the whole package contains. Notice my partitive method? I'm asking 3/4 is half of what? So my question is, how many ounces does the whole package contain? Here's what we worked on today. What we've been focusing on is really the interpretation of division problems. This helps when we're dealing with fractions. So, when you're thinking through any kind of division problem, ask yourself which interpretation, measurement or partitive, you should use. Say to yourself, how would I interpret this problem as measurement? And then you'd read to yourself, how many dividend are in the divisor? And once you've done that, ask yourself what the interpretation would be as the partitive method, which is saying the dividend, right, that whole number that's going to be divided up, is the divisor, a number of groups, of what size? Like 50 is 2/3 groups of what size, like we did earlier. And once you have said both of these interpretations out loud to yourself, I think that you'll find one will be easier to use for you, and especially to draw out and visualize, than the other.